It was December, a bright frozen day in the early morning. Far out in the country, there was an old Negro woman, with her head tied in a blue rag, coming along a path through the pine woods. Her name was Phoenix Jackson. She was very old and small, and she walked slowly in the dark pine shadows, moving a little from side to side in her steps with the balanced heaviness and lightness of a pendulum in a grandfather clock. She carried a thin, small cane made from an umbrella, and with this she kept tapping the frozen earth in front of her. This made a grave and persistent noise in the still air that seemed meditative, like the chirping of a solitary little bird. She wore a dark dress reaching down to her shoe tops, and an equally long apron of blue sugar shacks, with a full pocket, all neat and tidy. But every time she took a step, she might have fallen over her shoelaces, which dragged under her unlaced shoes. She looked straight ahead. Her eyes were blue with age. Her skin had a pattern all its own, of numberless branching wrinkles, and as though a whole little tree stood in the middle of her forehead. But a golden color ran underneath, and the two knobs of her cheeks were illuminated by a yellow burning under the dark. Under the rag, her hair came down on her neck in the frailest of ringlets, still black and with an odor like copper. Now and then there was a quivering in the thicket. Old Phoenix said,
"Get out of my way, all you wild animals. Keep out from under these feet. I got a long way."
On she went. The woods were deep and still. The sun made the pine needles almost too bright to look at up where the wind rocked. The cones dropped as light as feathers. Down in the hollow was the mourning dove. It was not too late for him. The path ran up a hill.
Seems like they're chained about my feet every time I get this far. Take a hold of me. Lead I should stay.
After she got to the top, she turned and gave a full, severe look behind her, where she had come.
Up through pines, now down through oaks.
Her eyes opened their widest, and she started down gently. But before she got to the bottom of the hill, a bush caught her dress. Her fingers were busy and intent, but her skirts were full and long, so that before she could pull them free in one place, they were caught in another. It was not possible to allow the dress to tear.
Thought you doing your appointed work. Never want to let nobody pass. Old eyes thought you was a pretty little green bush.
Finally, trembling all over, she stood free and after a moment dared to stoop for her cane.
Sun's so high. Time getting all gone here.
At the foot of this hill was a place where a log was laid across the creek.
Now comes the trial.
Putting her right foot out, she mounted the log and shut her eyes, lifting her skirt, leveling her cane fiercely before her, like a festival figure in some parade. She began to march across, then she opened her eyes and she was safe on the other side.
I wasn't as old as I thought.
But she sat down to rest and folded her hands over her knees. She did not dare to close her eyes, and when a little boy brought her a plate with a slice of marble cake, she spoke to him.
That would be acceptable.
But when she went to take it, there was just her own hand in the air. In the furrow, she made her way along.
Glad this isn't the season for bowls, and the good Lord made snakes to curl up and sleep in the winter. A pleasure I don't see no two-headed snake come around that tree where it come once. Took me a while to get by him, back in the summer.
She passed through the old cotton and went into a field of dead corn.
Through the maze now.
For there was no path. Then there was something tall, black, and skinny there moving before her. At first she took it for a man. It could have been a man dancing in the field, but she stood still and listened, and it did not make a sound. It was silent as a ghost.
Ghost? Who be you the ghost of? For I know nary a death close by.
But there was no answer, only the ragged dancing in the wind. She shut her eyes, reached out her hand, and touched a sleeve. She found a coat, and inside that an emptiness, cold as ice.
Oh, you scarecrow! I ought to be shut up for good. I'm too old. I'm the oldest person I know. Dance, scarecrow! Well, I dance with you.
Then she went on, parting her way from side to side with the cane, through the whispering field. At last she came to the end, to a wagon track where the silver grass blew between the red ruts. The quail were walking around like pullets, seeming all dainty and unseen.
Walk pretty. This is the easy place. This is the easy going.
She followed the track, swaying through the quiet bare fields, through the little strings of trees silver in their dead leaves, past cabins silver from weather, with the doors and windows boarded shut, all like old women under a spell sitting there.
I walking in their sleep.
In a ravine, she went where a spring was silently flowing through a hollow log. Old Phoenix bent and drank.
Sweet gum makes the water sweet. Nobody know who made this well, for it was here before I was born.
The track crossed a swampy part where the moss hung as white as lace from every limb.
Sleep on, alligators, and blow your bubbles.
Then the track went onto a road. Deep, deep, the road went down between the high green-colored banks. Overhead, the live oaks met, and it was dark as a cave. A black dog with a lolling tongue came up out of the weeds by the ditch. She was meditating and not ready when it came at her. She only hit him with a little of her cane. Over she went in the ditch, like a little puff of milkweed. Down there, her sense drifted away. A dream visited her, and she reached her hand up, but nothing reached down and gave her a pull. So she lay there and presently went to talking.
Old woman, that black dog come up out of the weeds to stall you off. And now there he's sitting on his fine tail smiling at you.
A white man finally came along and found her. A hunter, a young man with his dog on a chain.
Well, Granny, what are you doing there?
I'm laying on my back like a June bug waiting to be flipped over, mister.
He lifted her up, gave her a swing in the air, and set her down.
Anything broken, Granny?
No, sir. Them old dead weeds is springy enough.
Where do you live?
Way back over yonder past the ridge. You can't even see it from here.
On your way home?
No, sir. I go into town.
Why, that's too far. That's as far as I go when I go to get something for my troubles. Now you go on home, Granny.
No, sir. I'm bound to go to town. The time come around.
I know you old colored people wouldn't miss going to town to see Santa Claus.
But something held old Phoenix very still. The deep lines in her face went into a fierce and different radiation. Without warning, she had seen with her own eyes a flashing nickel fall out of the man's pocket onto the ground.
How old are you, Granny?
Too old to tell, mister. Look at that dog. Sick 'em, boy. Sick 'em.
Watch me get rid of that cur. Sick 'em, Pete, sick 'em.
Phoenix heard the dogs fighting and heard the man running and throwing sticks. She even heard a gunshot. But she was slowly bending forward by that time, further and further forward, the lids stretched down over her eyes as if she were doing this in her sleep. Her chin was lowered almost to her knees. The yellow palm of her hand came out from the fold of her apron. Her fingers slid down and along the ground under the piece of money with the grace and care that would have lifting an egg from under a setting hen. Then she slowly straightened up. She stood erect, and the nickel was in her apron pocket. A bird flew by. Her lips moved.
God watching me the whole time. I come to stealing.
Well, I scared him off that time. Doesn't this gun scare you, Granny?
No, sir. I've seen plenty go off close by me in my day.
Well, you must be 100 years old and scared of nothing. I'd give you a nickel if I had any.
Then they went in different directions, but she could hear the gun shooting again and again over the hill. She walked on. The shadows hung from the oak trees to the road like curtains. Then she smelled wood smoke and smelled the river, and she saw a steeple and the cabins on their shining. Bells were ringing, and she walked on. In the paved city, it was Christmas time. There were red and green electric lights strung and crisscrossed everywhere, and all turned on in the daytime. Old Phoenix would have been lost if she had not distrusted her eyesight and depended on her feet to know where to take her. A lady came along in the crowd, carrying an armful of red, green, and silver-wrapped presents. She gave off perfume like the red roses in hot summer, and Phoenix stopped her.
Please, missy, won't you lace up my shoe?
What do you want, Grandma?
See my shoe? Do good for out in the country, but wouldn't look right going into a big building.
Stand still then, Grandma.
She put her packages down on the sidewalk beside her and laced and tied both shoes tightly.
Can't lace them up with a cane. Thank you, missy. I don't mind asking a nice lady like you to lace them up once I'm on the street.
Moving slowly and from side to side, she went into the big building and into a tower of steps where she walked up and around until her feet knew to stop. She entered a door, and there she saw nailed up on the wall the document that had been stamped with a gold seal and framed in a gold frame, which matched the dream that was hung up in her head.
Here I be.
Charity case, I suppose.
But Phoenix only looked above her head. There was sweat on her face. The wrinkles in her skin shone like a bright net.
Speak up, Grandma. What's your name? We must have your history, you know. Have you been here before? What seems to be the trouble with you? Are you deaf?
Oh, that's just old Aunt Phoenix. She doesn't come for herself. She has a little grandson. She makes these trips just as regular as clockwork. She lives away back off the old Natchez Trace. The old woman sat down, bolt upright in the chair.
Now how is the boy? I said, how is the boy?
But Phoenix only waited and stared straight ahead, her face very solemn and withdrawn into rigidity.
Is his throat any better? Aunt Phoenix, don't you hear me? Is your grandson's throat any better since the last time you came for the medicine?
With her hands on her knees, the old woman waited silent, erect, and motionless, just as if she were in armor.
You mustn't take up our time this way, Aunt Phoenix. Tell us quickly about your grandson and get it over. He isn't dead, is he?
My grandson. It was my memory that had left me. There I sat, forgetting why I had made my long trip.
Forgot? After you came so far?
I am an old woman without an education. My grandson, he is still the same. I had forgot it in the coming.
Throat never heals, does it? Yes, swallowed lie when, was it, January, 2-3 years ago?
No, Missy, he just the same. He not able to swallow. He not catch his breath. And so the time come around, I go on another trip for the soothing medicine.
All right, the doctor said if you come and get it, you can have it, but it's an obstinate case.
My little grandson, he sat up there in the house all wrapped up, waiting by himself. We is the only two left in the world. He suffer, and it don't seem to put him back at all. He got a sweet look. He going to last. He wear a little patch quilt and peep out holding his mouth open like a little bird. I remember so plainly now. I'm not going to forget him again, no. The whole enduring time. I know him from all the other souls in creation.
All right. Charity? It's Christmas time, Grandma. Could I give you a few pennies out of my purse?
5 pennies is a nickel.
Here's a nickel.
Phoenix held out her hand. She received the nickel and then fished the other nickel out of her pocket. Then she gave a tap with her cane on the floor.
This is what come to me to do. I go into the store to buy my child a little windmill. He going to find it hard to believe there's such a thing in the world. I'll march myself right back where he waiting, holding up straight in his hand.
Then her slow step began on the stairs, going down.